be by the sea and it'll be clement and warm and beautiful, but you can be by the sea and when it's cruel and hard. And I've seen the sea take people, and I have seen people prove themselves to their utmost skill in terms of managing themselves at sea. But I'm always aware it's also a place where people live and people work. Well, when the call came, I had a good long think about it, and it seemed to me that Dublin Port was quite unique because it had the Great South Wall, which arches about 2 kilometres out into the sea, halfway between Howth and Dunleary. And all the shipping that comes into Dublin Port passes by Poolbeg Lighthouse, within perhaps 50 metres of Poolbeg Lighthouse. It's so close. And it seemed that there were adjacent lives passing each other in parallel without there ever being any crossover between the two. And I thought it would be really interesting for people who are walking on the Great South Wall to hear about the lives of the people on the ships passing them by. So in the bid that I made, I suggested that I base myself at the Seafarers Centre in Alexandra Road and meet with the seafarers who come in and out of the Seafarers Centre and just talk to them about their lives and where they're from. The seafarers coming in cover a global reach, and I thought that the people walking on the Great South Wall might like to listen to find out about those lives. In the Seafarers Centre, I was allowed to make a very little mini studio inside in one of the offices, and then when seafarers came in, I invited them to do an interview with me, and that was it, basically just people talking to each other. What really, really struck me about all of them was their commitment to supporting their families and spending such long time away from the people that they loved to earn a living to support them. I mean, that is such a huge sacrifice. One of the primary difficulties was actually getting seafarer stories, because it was in February of 2017, and I don't know whether it was my misfortune, my bad timing, or some other unknown event, but very few seafarers were coming into the Seafarers Centre at the time that I was there. So I wasn't getting the volume of interviews that I thought that I would get. So I was kind of a bit discombobulated by the fact that, you know, these interviews weren't happening. But my research around seafaring kind of demonstrated that seafaring has changed so much, that seafarers don't have a lot of time in port. And so then it was understandable why I wasn't getting the volume of interviews that I thought I would. And so in a way that shifted the emphasis of the podcasts to try and address the reality of seafaring today versus our imagined understanding of what seafaring is like.
The invisible workforce. And nowadays they're mostly from the developing countries. They're multicultural.
So 24 hours to ports. Malaysia, Singapore, Malaysia, Singapore. It was really rush. Doing more early mornings.
People get crazy because of there's no refresh. You cannot get some refreshing.
The first podcast looks at how the contemporary conditions of seafaring happened, and you can largely trace them to a single innovation, and that single innovation is the box container. After containers came in, things changed totally within ports, and the things that happened were that ports moved downstream. The amount of time spent in port was reduced because containers were a much more efficient way of carrying cargo. And it meant that seafaring was removed from the public eye. Prior to that, seafaring was very central to lots of cities. And in Dublin Port, you would have had seafarers right up as far as the Custom House Quay.
16 years. Chief officer, I work 7 years. I work
I like
5
it, and I need the money also. I have son at home. Very soon I will be grandmother. So, and I help parents.
Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Filipino, Syria.
I think that for the ordinary sea hands, their life is not glamorous and they don't necessarily get to see the world.
Second podcast then tried to address the way in which regulation manages the globalized world of seafaring. And it also looks to what it's like to be a seafarer in the time of the internet. So, for example, one of the biggest services that a seafarer centre can offer is free Wi-Fi. And during that second podcast, I also met my only female interviewee. She quintessentially demonstrates how much of seafaring is a migrant labour issue. She was there because it gave her a way of supporting her parents, her children, and her soon-to-be-born grandchild.
I went to see this myself for a while. Been living over in Ringsend. I was always a venture making people down around Ringsend.
Reduced massively the numbers of people, not just seafarers, but dock workers and their families in the tradition.
The third podcast then looked to the future in a circuitous route. I started on the Great South Wall, talking with the walkers on the Great South Wall. And it was so interesting to meet the people on the Great South Wall. They had such an interest in the port. They had such knowledge of the ships coming in and out. And then the second part of the podcast deals with the future of shipping. And just like any other technology, there are changes and innovations happening in shipping. And so just like we expect there to be driverless cars in the future, well, we also expect there to be what are called autonomous vessels. So again, that will be a huge change for seafarers in the way they work, and a huge change for people who spend time at sea. Well, I hope it sparks their curiosity, and I hope it sparks as well their empathy, because the people on the ships are passing so close to them. To have an understanding of their lives, to understand that there might be someone on a ship who hasn't been able to see their family for 8 months, that kind of shifts something in you. It certainly shifted something in me.